All right, just a few hours from now, the Trudeau government will table its 2022 federal budget.
We are joined live now by Mike Lecouture, senior political correspondent for CTV News Channel. Mike, you're live in Ottawa right now. Can you tell us a bit about the political reaction so far?
Yeah, well, so far, obviously, as you'd expect, the opposition party is not exactly liking what they're hearing that will be coming in the budget. Candice Bergen talking about this, calling it an NDP budget because of that confidence and supply agreement that the NDP have brokered with the Liberal government, and saying that, you know, this government has continued to go far left with each successive budget in the last 6 years. And the more that they do that, the more that Canadians are further and further behind when it comes to inflation, when it comes to affordability and all of those kinds of things. Now, some of the things that we're going to see in this budget, one of them CTV News has learned is $10 billion over 5 years specifically for housing. This is really one of the key pieces of the budget from what we're hearing. Part of that will be a ban for 2 years on foreign buying of any homes, primary homes here in Canada. So people from outside of this country cannot buy a home unless they are going to actually live in it. Then in terms of the money, $4 billion that we're hearing will be set aside for municipalities to update their zoning and permitting regulations. This is because what we have heard from municipalities is that this is really where the logjam is in terms of trying to get new homes built, because it's a really long process that they have difficulty doing that. And then we're expected to get about $1 billion that'll go to affordable housing, and then $1.5 billion not just in funding but also in loans for co-op housing. So that really is the central part here, guys.
Yeah, and Mike, probably not a surprise that the Conservatives have come out and said they're not necessarily fans of what they're hearing so far, and the fact that, you know, they're tying the Liberals and New Democrats together based on the deal you were just discussing, Mike. But what about this $8 billion in defense spending? We heard Jagmeet Singh earlier this week, you know, say he feels like 2% of what NATO's looking, 2% of GDP, what NATO's looking for is a bit arbitrary. This isn't 2%, but it is a lot on defense spending. Is that going to satisfy NDP MPPs or enough of them?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that, you know, what Singh had said is basically he doesn't want to see the government spend 2% just to say that it's spending 2%. He said that, look, if there are things that this military needs, and he said our military does need to be given the proper equipment to do the jobs that we ask of them. So he doesn't have a problem with military spending, but what it sounds like, if you're reading between the lines, is that Jagmeet Singh is essentially saying don't get to 2% just because we're in a geopolitical environment right now where everybody should be going to 2%, or it looks like it would be looking good if we get to 2%. That is one of the things that they definitely don't want in all of this. So that is what we are hearing from the NDP. But when you consider that right now, guys, they are at, this government is at about 1.36% of overall spending on defense compared to GDP. That is far below that aspirational goal of all NATO countries, and especially at a time when everybody is looking at this, not only the defense for NATO, making sure that we are tightening up that eastern flank when we consider what is going on in Ukraine. But a lot of the focus now is on the North American air defense and what we can do to shore up our northern border when you consider that you look at the globe, on the other side of that northern border is Russia.
All right, and Mike, last question for you. You know, we heard Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, talk about fiscal responsibility, but since they kind of scrapped that whole $10 billion budget, we're not going to run over it, and the last deficit sitting at $58.4 billion, what exactly does fiscally responsible look like at this point?
Yeah, they kind of changed the definition of that about a year or two ago when they were talking about fiscal guardrails as opposed to fiscal anchors. That's basically a lot of fiscal responsibility talk for saying that we will have something that we will make sure that we will have smaller deficits. That's what he had said in 2015 during the election campaign, as you had mentioned, that you're going to be only about $10 billion each. A lot of that actually got thrown out the door when the pandemic happened, and a number of the pandemic programs that caused spending to balloon. But now what the Prime Minister is saying is that they want to look at it as a debt to GDP ratio, making sure that they're keeping that small and making sure that private sector economists are looking at that as well, because that's what they use as a real sort of barometer for how well the government is doing and how big of a deficit they're running. And so this is where this Liberal government is going now, trying to make sure that they continually bring that percentage down, and the Prime Minister said that they will be continuing to be responsible on that track.
Okay, that is CTV News Channel senior correspondent Mike Lecouture joining us from Ottawa. Appreciate the time, Mike. Thanks so much.
Thank you.